For Or Data, the operating system for modern media. Dear listener, welcome to the Quarter Hour. Today, we're talking about the age-old debate. And I say age-old because it feels like it's a debate that does age and rage occasionally about local radio versus networked or national radio. Now, depending where you're listening to this in the world, maybe this isn't a debate for you, but it is one that happens in Australia from time to time, and it does happen in other countries. So I thought I'd assemble a fantastic brains trust. And they weren't available. So I got Spencer Howson and James Cridland, who have just fallen for the oldest joke in the book. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello, Wade. G'day, James.
A couple of blokes in Brizzy. You'll do.
Absolutely. I'll do.
James is the editor of Podnews and Radioland, and Spencer is currently doing a Ph.D. in and around this very topic. So I might start with you, Spencer. This age-old question, local versus national. First of all, how do we define it? What are some of the things we're looking for when we're talking about local radio?
Okay, so probably 5 years ago when I had just finished, actually it was 10 years ago, finished presenting the breakfast show at the ABC, I probably would have sat here and defended live and local, as many in the radio industry like to do. But in recent years, I've noticed that in a number of regional centres, the most listened to breakfast show is not a local breakfast show. And the example that I give quite often is Mad Isa, where there were new ratings a couple of weeks ago, and the most listened to breakfast show in Mad Isa with just short of 50% of the audience, 49.6%, actually comes from the Gold Coast. And in second place, 4LM on 20%, which is a local show, but it comes from Kingaroy, much closer to Brisbane than Mad Isa. And then in third place is the ABC in Mad Isa, coming from Mad Isa with 16%. And I noticed this happening all over the country, and I just wanted to try to work out why and what's going on. Far more than you can discuss in 15 minutes, obviously. That's why I'm spending 8 years doing a PhD on this. But what I can say on Mad Isa, I've just been up there off the back of those ratings, and I've had an online survey running in Mad Isa concurrently with Extra having its survey up there. And I've been interviewing listeners and non-listeners in Mad Isa. And the thing that I was very interested to find, and this is the first time that I've talked about this particular figure, and it's not final because people in Mount Isa are still able to do the survey, but I asked whatever radio station was your most listened to breakfast show, so in Mount Isa, it's Hit. So people who listen to Hit as their most listened to breakfast show, which remember comes from the Gold Coast, I asked the question, where do you think that program comes from? And in Mount Isa, 27% of people who listen to Hit as their number one breakfast show think that the program comes from Mount Isa.
Right. Okay.
Quarter of people just don't know. In fact, one of the people that I interviewed up there is a Hit listener, and she said, it comes from Townsville. Now, it used to come from Townsville. Now it comes from the Gold Coast. But she said that the appeal for her in the program was not news, it was entertainment. It's the format, it's the Hit format. So 27% of people in Mount Isa that listen to Hit as their number one breakfast show think that it comes from Mount Isa. 15% don't know. 6% think it comes from interstate, and 52% think that it comes from somewhere else in Queensland. So you can either take that and say, wow, a quarter of people are being fooled or think that it comes from Mount Isa, or you can say 85, whatever the 52 plus 6, 58% of people know that it comes from somewhere else and don't care.
They still listen. And I think this is an interesting point because, there's so many ways to cut this. And obviously we're not going to be able to do it all in 15 minutes, but I think just to set the table on this conversation, I was very perplexed by some of the coverage of Christian O'Connell's survey into Sydney on Gold 101.7. It's way too early for anyone to say if that's a success or a failure, but the commentariat around those ratings, and I think perhaps some of ARN's rivals, are certainly looking at that and going, well, hang on, this isn't going to work. James, what's your thinking on Christian? Too early to know?
Not way too early to know. I mean, we haven't even had two proper full surveys yet. We're, survey 2, which I have to remind people about, is not a whole new survey. Half of it is still survey 1 merged into survey 2. So we're in a process where, frankly, we've got a bunch of data which is telling us that they miss Jonesy and Amanda, not anything to do with Christian O'Connell's show. And I think it's way too early to chop and change. Unfortunately, commercial radio being what it is, they will be looking for a success in the same way that Kyle and Jackie O was clearly a success when it moved over to KISS, but that was an aberration, not how it normally works. I do not think that it's anywhere near early enough to be talking about where Christian is going in that particular market.
Yeah, makes sense. And any thoughts on what Spencer's just told us, James, about those figures?
Yeah, I'm fascinated. I mean, I would wonder whether people care whether or not it's from the local city or not, or whether or not actually the content. I mean, a lot of the content that I hear on radio stations could frankly be coming from anywhere. And if you're back announcing a Doobie Brothers song and you're going into the travel, then you can do that from the studio above the pizza shop in the center of town, or you can do that via voice tracking from 200k away. It's to me, that's relatively irrelevant. It's what the content is, and as long as I keep on talking a lot about the content for radio being real and relevant, real human beings relevant to the audience that it's talking to. And if that breakfast show is real and relevant, which it clearly sounds if it is, as if it's a number one in that particular market, then I think it's ticking all of the boxes there. Yeah.
One of these days, I want to find that studio that's above the pizza shop that you keep talking about, James, because that sounds like an amazing place, an amazing radio station to work in. One of the things that I've done is I've created an index of localness with the breakfast shows that are available in Mount Isa and other places that I'm looking at. So I can tell you that if you're listening to Hit Mount Isa, just over 1.1 times a minute, you'll hear a local reference. And if you listen to, by comparison, the local ABC, it's 1.4 times per minute that you'll hear a local reference. With the ABC, that localness, those local references, 75% of the time come from the host and their guests. 17% of the time it's in news bulletins, and 8% of the time it's in pre-recorded promos or station idents. Hit the 1.1 per minute, 92% of those local references are in the commercials and in the idents. 8% are in news. Cleverly, at the top and bottom of every hour, there are these news bulletins that always contain at least one local story, and 0% of local references come from the hosts who are on the Gold Coast.
Right, of course, yeah, because it's a network show. And I think this is sometimes lost in this debate because to me, it's set up as a binary proposition. Does localism work at breakfast? Yes or no? Is networking good or bad? And there's way more nuance. And I'm just wondering, in the Australian experience, obviously the Kyle and Jackie O experiment into Melbourne did no one any favours, no matter what your argument is, for network shows, for the success of Kyle and Jack getting out of Sydney. To me, it probably still doesn't prove whether a local show would be needed in Melbourne or not for breakfast. That's still an open question in my mind. But how is this question handled elsewhere, James, in your travels? You look at a lot of radio and work with a lot of companies overseas. Is it a similar proposition where people go local versus national? What works?
I mean, what we've seen, for example, in the UK, you can tell from this excellent accent I have. I'm from the UK, and what we've seen from the UK is that pretty well much of local radio has gone. It's been replaced by national radio. That national radio either comes from London or it comes from Manchester. Now, of course, the UK far, far smaller than Australia. But in terms of that, it's much the same as Spencer has been talking about. Actually, there are lots of rules, far more onerous rules from Ofcom than there are from the ACMA in this part of the world in terms of news. So local news has to be done and has to be done in the area, by the way, not just piped in from somewhere else. So you've got local news, local travel, of course, and local commercials. And indeed, there's one of the radio groups in the UK which is now doing quite a lot of its local travel using AI voices. Now, that could be a bad thing, but in this particular case, what it actually means is if you're on 100 different FM, outputs, it means that you can have 100 different travel bits, 100 different things which are covering just the transmission area of that particular FM, broadcast. So you can do some quite smart things in terms of that. But that, there's still an awful lot of local news, local information, local travel, and of course, local commercials, things that you might want to buy from local advertisers that you hear on the radio, even if, Spencer has been talking about the actual hosts are from somewhere else. And, here in Australia, we've been there in the past. A tremendously successful show, Hamish and Andy, was not a local show. Everybody talks about how wonderful Hamish and Andy was. Not one person has been saying, but of course it was all coming from Melbourne. So we have that, and you could also, of course, have a look into the US. Howard Stern, of course, in the US, tremendously successful in the US, albeit a different time and a different age for radio. But there was no pretense of localness in terms of that at all. And in fact, Tom Webster has just written a really good whole thing about iHeartRadio and about how local broadcasting is in the US. And he says, again, that most of the localness is the commercials. But there is an awful lot of national stuff, of stuff that's piped in from other places. And so I think actually, it's a conversation really going on about the lack of local output everywhere in the world. Let's not forget, of course, ABC local radio, for most of the time is not.
Yes, that's right.
For most of the time, it's either coming from your state capital, or it's coming from either Melbourne or Sydney. So I think with all of this, it's not a binary conversation of local works and and regional or national doesn't. It's much more a nuanced conversation. Which is where I think that conversations around Kyle and Jackie O aren't particularly helpful, because that was a dreadful show, put into a market that was not ready for it, and put into a market which at least one of the hosts openly said he hated. And so for that to be in any way a bellwether for whether radio should be local or not is, I think, missing quite a lot of the point.
There's also the question of whether the presenters are in the town, and which James, I know you mentioned that, but just going back to Mount Isa, 4LM, which is the legacy AM station in Mount Isa. It's now the number 2 breakfast show, and that show comes from Kingaroy. The guy who does it, Adam Staples, also does the Emerald breakfast show, and they alternate day by day which is live and which is pre-recorded. So one week he'll do Monday, Wednesday, Friday live into Mount Isa, and then the following week, Tuesday, Thursday, live into Mount Isa. So he's doing a show for Mount Isa. He's just not in Mount Isa. You're not going to bump into him at the shops. By contrast, Triple M in Bendigo, I was listening to, not Bendigo, Mildura, listening to this morning, and Matt Man there is doing 6 shows this week. He's doing a show special one on Saturday for 3 hours from 8 till 11, all part of Meet Every Listener. He's trying to meet every listener at the moment. And there's no way that someone in Mount Isa is going to bump into Adam Staples from 4LM.
It is interesting having a look back into the UK, because the rules are that you can just broadcast a national station across all of the local FMs that you own. But that's not actually what happens, particularly if you have a look, for example, at Capital, which for all intents and purposes you would think is a national radio station, comes from London, but is broadcast all over the place, except not in Scotland, because Scotland feel that they are quite different to the rest of the UK, and Capital tried national stuff from London. It didn't work. And so Capital now, if you have a look at the output for that particular station, they have gone to all Scotland for that particular station. And I think that's interesting. There are certainly bits of Australia which feel as if they're a little bit removed from other parts.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I think if you ask anyone who's worked in commercial radio in Australia, Scotland is Perth. Funnily enough, what an irony. I think there is a Perth in Scotland, isn't there?
There is.
But, I certainly remember a quote from a general manager who will remain nameless, but everyone will know who I'm talking about, who was in Perth and absolutely swore that Hamish and Andy wouldn't work in Perth because Perth people like Perth things. And I'm pretty sure Hamish and Andy went to number 1 pretty quickly in Perth. Hey, I want to keep the conversation going if we can, because Spencer, you're doing this ongoing work. Do you have a website that people can go and have a look at?
Yes, localradiostudy.com should take you to my Substack. I say should because for some reason some browsers don't seem to like it. But localradiostudy.com, and you can keep an eye on what I'm up to there. Mildura's next for me. The rating's coming up there at the end of May.
Great, thank you. And James, Radioland and Podnews is where we find you. And you're always looking for those international examples as well. So I might touch base with you in a few weeks' time if you've got any more data, any more stories to share, and maybe we've got some more survey results we can dig a little bit deeper into. But thanks for coming on today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Thank you so much for asking.
Thank you. Spencer Howson and James Cridland there, the Brains Trust of Brisbane. That's what I'm calling it from now on. In fact, they should do a podcast together, those two. Cover a bit of rugby league and all sorts of other Aussieisms. That's it for the quarter hour for today. A new episode again next Tuesday. Dear listener, see you then.